Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Deirdre Daly, and I'm the president of LCD. I'm also a partner at Finn Dixon and Hurling. We're very excited to have this panel today. Very much appreciate our panelists participating and all of you joining. LCD is known for its signature programs, particularly its summer pipeline program and its long-standing mentoring program. Building on that mentoring and support of college students who are interested in the law and also law students, we're also focused on young lawyers of color who work throughout Connecticut. And that is what has inspired this panel. And I'm very happy to say that my moderator, who's sitting to my left here, perhaps your right, is both young and a person of color. And happily, you're going to be hearing a lot more from her as this panel goes forward. So our agenda today is that each of our panelists is going to tell you about their personal journey. And we're very fortunate to have such a great group, and also to note that they're a very diverse group from many perspectives, not only racially and ethnically, but also from their practice areas, from their levels of seniority, and from where they practice in Connecticut. Some are in the public sector and some are in the private sector. Each of them is going to give us a little description of their personal professional journey. And then after that, Tahiti is going to lead them in a number of questions. And we very much hope that we hear from you as audience members. If you have any questions, please enter them in the chat, and we'll be very happy to post them and share them with our panelists. So the first person I want to introduce you to is my friend and colleague and partner at Finn Dixon and Hurling, Tamu Lewis. Tamu is a partner in our debt finance department, and she has both traversed countries and also practice areas in her journey. So we're very happy to be hearing from her, and I'll turn it over to Tamu to start.
Thank you, Deirdre. So I guess I will kick it off here. So I am in the debt finance group here at Finn Dixon. I've been here for, it's been about 15 years now, unbelievably, but I've actually been an attorney for 25 years actually this year. And I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago. And I went to law school the first time on the Barbados campus of the University of the West Indies, just a short walk from the beach there. And after that, I practiced for maybe 3 years, sort of a general lawyer in Port of Spain in Trinidad, before coming to the U.S. When I got to the U.S., I went to Columbia Law School and did I was in the LLM program, and then I transferred to the JD program. On Columbia's beautiful campus as well, not quite as beautiful as the campus in Barbados, but but pretty close. So that was sort of my second jaunt through law school, and after that, I got my first job here in the U.S. at Paul Hastings in Stamford, where I was in the real estate group for 3 years. And Paul Hastings has since then moved out of Stamford and moved the folks in that office mainly to New York City. So at that point, as I sort of contemplated, moving with my 2 young children to the city, I started looking at options in Stamford and moved along with a few other Paul Hastings alumni to Finn Dixon, and I've been in the debt finance group ever since. So that was sort of a transition for me, practice areas. And I'll get into it a little more in terms of what that transition was like for me, et cetera, in terms of countries to begin with, but also practice groups. But just to continue the introductions, here in the debt finance group, we basically, we represent borrowers and lenders. We primarily support the firm's broader mergers and acquisitions group, and we do a lot of support work for our private equity clients. So from the debt finance perspective, we really are sort of involved from day one, on the platform deal when our client makes the original investment, and then if there are follow-on acquisitions as our clients grow those businesses, And then, we become advisors to the client. So it's really, the fun part of it is really that you're in this relationship, not only with the private equity client, but you get to know the folks at the portfolio company over a 5 to 7 year period, where you're really an advisor to them and you get to know their business and what they need, and you form those types of relationships while getting to know sort of businesses in various industries. So that's what's kind of fun for me in this practice area. I know that sometimes debt finance can sound kind of bland or boring even, but I think it's not just the complexity of the documents or the black and white letters, but really those relationships that you form along the way.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Tamu, and we'll look forward to hearing more about your practice and your journey. I'm next going to introduce you to Ginny Kim, who I've known through my LCD experience. Ginny has been a longstanding treasurer at LCD and a critical leader in the organization. She also has a really interesting background, having worked in-house for many years, but just recently moved from the private to the public sector and works for the Connecticut Treasurer's Office in a compliance and a broader role in that, but including compliance. So Ginny, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Deirdre. Well, hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Really glad to be here. I'm a failed doctor. If you ask my parents, my career journey started with all the pre-med classes, which have no relevance to what I do now. And then I realized that my passions were really in the public interest. So I went to law school wanting to go into government ultimately. It took me 25 years to get there. But in the meantime, I started out at Dewey Ballantine in New York City as a securitizations associate. And then I moved up to Connecticut for family reasons, joined LeBoeuf, Lamb, Green, and McCray in the Hartford office and worked in their corporate group. I did a lot of M&A work. At some point, the call to go in-house came. It sounded like a great opportunity. So I started working at Pratt & Whitney in 2000, working on their purchase agreements, and I never looked back. So it was 22 years later, after having done M&As, all sorts of various compliance and litigation and other transactional and business unit jobs, that I realized that my calling to go into government was still there. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of the experiences I had in-house, because I did find it was worth it for me to do that for that long. I got to do almost every different area of law that you could possibly do in-house, which is pretty exciting. But now my job is to oversee our compliance programs, which are fundamentally grounded in anti-corruption laws that the statutes create rules around to ensure that corruption doesn't occur in government. My other hat is diversity. So I'm the Chief Diversity Officer for the Office of the Treasurer.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Ginny. So our third panelist that we're going to hear from is Calvin Wu. I'm glad we were able to get a man on this panel. Thank you for standing in on that position, Calvin. We needed you. Calvin started out, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about this, but started out in the Bronx as a state prosecutor, which is a very tough area. If any of you spent any time in that courthouse, it's kind of another world. So he started out there, and he ended up a litigator in Fairfield County. I came to know Calvin well because we were on a policing reform task force for 18 months that met on a weekly basis during COVID virtually. And we became friends and colleagues through that process. So Calvin, thank you for being here and look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks very much, Deirdre. As Deirdre mentioned, my name is Calvin Wu. I'm a partner at the law firm of Verrill Dana. We are a New England-based law firm with office as well in Washington, D.C., and I'm resident in our Westport, Connecticut office here in Fairfield County. I'm not from the Connecticut area. I am actually I was born and raised in Queens, New York, and then found my way to Long Island, and then found my way to law school in DC, and eventually found my way up here to Connecticut, where I practice mostly, but I do still practice in New York State once in a while as well. Came up here because my wife was, well, at the time was my girlfriend, was working as a teacher here and still is a teacher here. So I guess you could say I followed her, so to speak. As Deirdre mentioned, I started off as a prosecutor particularly as an assistant district attorney in the Bronx. It is definitely a very different place to practice. I worked specifically in its investigations unit, in its economic crime bureau, and I'd say I just loved it. I mean, I gained a world of experience, balancing a huge caseload, immediately getting my feet in the courtroom and appearing before judges, investigating, building, arguing, and trying cases, building a level of confidence that I have to say, probably I still take with me to this day. When I first went to private practice, which happened after my stint at the DA's office, I have to say I had a level of confidence, knowing that I probably tried more cases or I handled more hearings than most of my adversaries, including those who were, several years more senior than I was. And quite frankly, that's just simply the part of private practice. And could tell you just don't go to trial as much, and you don't even go to court that much. And nowadays, you probably don't even go to court as much at all because everything's like we're doing right now. It's virtual. And then after that, I went to private practice. I mentioned a short stint in New York City at a law firm, a mid-sized law firm. Came up to Connecticut, worked for a couple firms until I'm now hanging my hat very happily at Verrill Dana. My current practice is a hybrid of commercial litigation, which I handle, business disputes of varying degrees for large and small companies, and have recently have a very heavy focus on trade secret litigation, as well as representing individuals and businesses and defending against and responding to government investigations in the areas of healthcare, financial, as well as environmental matters. I serve in various capacities here at my law firm, including I actually just got elected to my firm's executive board. I'm very happily serving there. I'm on our business development committee, and I'm very happily active on a diversity committee. I also am part of, as folks are here, very active in the LCD, absolutely wonderful organization of which I serve on the board of directors. I'm also on the board of directors of Connecticut Bar Foundation, which is another wonderful organization that I hope folks, as you guys get more senior, all people who are listening here, the more junior folks get involved in, because it's a great organization. And I'm also an active member of CAPABA, which is the Connecticut Asian Pacific American Bar Association, and its national affiliate. Two wonderful organizations as well.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Calvin. Appreciate that. Now, the next two panelists have some very exciting news that I hope they're both going to share with you, but I'm going to leave that to them. We're going to start with Pilar Gonzalez, who was a state prosecutor in Connecticut and also did appellate work there. And then she moved over to the federal side. And for the last few years, she's been an assistant United States attorney in the Connecticut U.S. Attorney's Office, doing violent crime and other work there that I'm sure she'll share. And she also has some upcoming exciting news that I'll leave to her to share with all of you. So Pilar, eager to hear from you.
Thanks, Deirdre. Good evening, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with you, and I'm so excited to hear from all the other panelists and to hear your questions. My name is Pilar Gonzalez. I am currently an assistant United States attorney in the District of Connecticut. I work in the New Haven office. My path to get there began at Quinnipiac University School of Law. I was born and raised in Connecticut and happy to go to attend law school there. I started as a part-time law student. I had a job at a law firm where I worked during the day. I can certainly tell you about this later, but I quickly realized that I wanted to get law school done as quickly as possible, and I eventually switched to full-time and was very lucky as my first job out of law school to be hired as an appellate prosecutor with the Connecticut Division of Criminal Justice. And in that role, I represented the state in criminal appeals in the appellate and Supreme Court. And it was a wonderful opportunity as a really young lawyer to argue, before these really intimidating courts and on cases that were challenging, and to kind of be thrown right into it and expected to do the job as well and as competently as my colleagues who were 20, 25 years my senior. But it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it, but I knew I wanted to be a trial prosecutor and I wanted to get the courtroom experience as well. So I then moved to the state's attorney's office in New Haven, and I was a trial prosecutor there for several years. And similar to what Calvin just described, being a trial prosecutor was an absolutely chaotic and wonderful experience. Every single day I went to work. I handled truly hundreds of cases every week, tons of hearings, trials, everything that could possibly come your way as a new lawyer comes your way as a prosecutor in any state court. And while I was there, I handled all different types of cases, but then I began later on in my time there to focus on domestic violence cases. And I am very proud to say that I was in charge of the domestic violence docket there for a number of years, where we were able to work very closely with a team of providers, law enforcement, court personnel, treatment providers, and so forth. And we put together a specialized docket that was for the most serious batterers to not only be held accountable for their crimes, but also to receive intensive treatment to hopefully prevent them from returning to court in the future. And that was truly one of the most rewarding parts of my job when I was there. I then moved to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And one of the reasons I did that was that I really enjoyed the trial part of being a prosecutor, but I kind of missed some of the writing, researching, argument part of the job when I was in the Appellate Bureau. And the U.S. Attorney's Office offered the perfect opportunity to do that, because in the U.S. Attorney's Office, a single prosecutor or a team of prosecutors handles a case from the minute the investigation begins all the way until the appeal ends. So that means you're involved from the very beginning stages, and then a couple of years later, you're standing in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, defending all the decisions that you made and all of the orders that the judge put into place during the course of the trial. And usually, hopefully, along the way, you get to try the case too. And so I started out in the Major Crimes Unit, which handles all types of matters: child exploitation, government program fraud, some violent crime, firearms offenses. And I later moved to the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, where I currently work, where I focus more on violent organizations and longer term, more complex investigations. But because I never want to forget my roots, so to speak, in domestic violence work, I also serve as the Violence Against Women Act coordinator in the office, where I help provide training and assistance to other prosecutors and law enforcement agencies handling federal domestic violence matters. I serve on the outreach committee. We have some wonderful new programs that have been put into place by our office, where we speak to middle school students about the perils of gun violence with a team of really outstanding people, none of whom are lawyers, which is why it's such an effective tool. Probably they're a little bit more interesting than we are to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. But it's been a wonderful experience. However, just like you'll hear from Cherie Phoenix Sharp, we both have some exciting news to share, which is that in February of this year, we were nominated by Governor Lamont to serve as judges of the Superior Court. So we are holding off on any celebrations as we await a final vote, but we'll be happy to talk about I'll speak for myself. I'd be happy to talk about my path there. And, again, nothing is final, but very honored to be considered, and happy to be here with you all tonight.
Terrific. Thank you so much, and congratulations. I know it's still a process, but I understand you're in the very home stretch. It's wonderful news. And to you, Cherie Phoenix Sharp, as well, thank you so much for being here. And to give everybody a little bit of background, Cherie started out as Deputy Corporation Counsel for the City of New Haven. She's been in the public sector for most of her career, and she currently is General Counsel for the state's Lieutenant Governor. And she also, as Pilar alluded, has some upcoming exciting news. So Cherie, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. And I will say that going last is both exciting because you get a full-blown reminder of all the different ways and types of practices there are in the legal profession. And it's also very intimidating because everybody does amazing things. But it's really a joy to be on this panel today. I'm actually, like Calvin, from New York. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and my family now lives in Westchester. I didn't move to Connecticut until after law school. So I actually had a lot of law school classmates that went to Bronx DAs and, and Manhattan DAs and Brooklyn DAs. So I am a little familiar with some of the exciting experiences that happened there. But I was very eager and happy to come to Connecticut to practice here. I had that interest pretty much from early on in my law school journey. And I was very fortunate to work as a summer associate with the firm of Murtha Cullina LLP. And they wound up hiring me as a full-time associate in 2007, right after I graduated from law school. So I started out my career with them and I was there for almost 7 years. And I was primarily in 2 different practice areas. So I worked both in the commercial real estate practice area, which also involves some finance and corporate work because we would help commercial clients sometimes create businesses from the start for properties that they were going to lease. It was a very robust transaction when you're dealing with large commercial clients. And then I also worked in government and regulatory work. So we represented cable clients who, for those that don't know, are regulated in the public utilities realm. And so I did a lot of filings before the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority and argued on behalf of them, often on paper, but sometimes we'd show up with commentary as well. And I did support some of the attorneys who were also in the Boston office. So we had clients throughout New England. So I did get to travel to public utility authorities in New Hampshire, as well as Massachusetts, and I think also in Vermont once as well. So I had a very exciting time in what was two very different practice areas. And I really did spend about 50-50 throughout the almost 7 years that I was at the firm in either one, because some would be heavy when the other one was low and vice versa. I was always open to trying new things. So I did support a litigation case and got to nibble in discovery, which I empathize with all of you who do that regularly. And I also did get a little snippet into trademarks. So I wound up getting a really wide range of experiences at Murtha Cullina, and it was very exciting to be at a firm with so many talented partners and associates who, really took an interest in making sure that you learned the best way to practice law and really focused on your skill and developing that talent. I didn't see myself at a firm long term, so I started to look for some other opportunities. Oddly enough, I did not see myself in the public sector, but I wound up taking a wonderful opportunity with the City of New Haven as Deputy Corporation Counsel. I was hired first under the then Corporation Counsel, Victor Bolden, who is now a federal judge, and it was very exciting to get his just knowledge, and he is one of the most amazing people I've ever met. And so to even work with him for about 8 months, I think it wound up being, was an extremely rewarding experience. And one of the things that I was able to do at the city is really not only practice law, but practice it with one client that doesn't feel like one client, because when you have like 20 departments that do 20 different things, you don't feel like you work for one client. But what's exciting about it is that you always remember that it is one client, right? So just because the engineering department or the parks department or LCI or the fire department has something going on, you always want to be a city with one voice, right? And so it was very exciting to be in a managerial role in addition to practicing law, because I was really responsible for bringing a lot of departments and people and stakeholders together to make sure that we were always on the right path and getting the right answer as one city. So that was just extremely rewarding work, especially with respect to really getting to see the impact of your work on the constituents and on the people that your client is really there to serve. And it was really at that time that I realized how exciting being in the public sector was, because I could really start to feel how my practice of law, the way that I did it, and my passion for it could really change the lives of people. So when the opportunity came up with the Office of the Lieutenant Governor, who, if you have not met Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz, know that she is one of the strongest advocates that you will ever meet. It was not at all a doubt that I wanted to take on this opportunity to be able to be involved in more policy level work and work that she would be doing on behalf of the entire state. The Lieutenant Governor is president of the state Senate. So I helped, with her in presiding over the state Senate. I certainly helped with her on a range of any of the legal matters that came before her, and also worked on some things like the Governor's Council on Women and Girls and other things that, were under her purview as chair of a different commission or council. So it's a really different feel from the kind of work that I did at the city, but also still extremely important, and also still something where you can see the impact of the work on the people. So I think, as Pilar referenced, once you get to that point and know that that's where you want to be as an attorney, it's kind of hard to not have an interest in the judiciary, where you can really have another type of impact in the legal profession. And so I was very excited to be nominated by Governor Lamont to be a judge of the Superior Court. And I, with Pilar, am hoping that that final confirmation vote comes affirmatively and soon, and hope to look forward to serving in that capacity.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So as you all now know, we have this outstanding panel, and we're very much looking forward to diving in a little deeper with them on questions that Tahiti will lead. But before she does that, I just would love for her to share a little bit about her background. Just to embarrass her completely, she is like a superstar at our law firm. She's a young M&A lawyer in the corporate department and has exceeded everyone's expectations with leaps and bounds. She's kicking me under the table right now. But so I'm going to turn it over to Tahiti. I encourage her to say a few words, and then she'll lead off the questioning.
Hi, everyone. Now that I'm totally blushing. My name is Tahiti Vinas Andrews, and like Deirdre said, I'm a corporate associate here at Dixon and Hurling. I represent our private equity clients in their platform acquisitions, add-on acquisitions, ultimately sales, and have had an incredible experience here. But a little bit about myself, I'm also from New York, like Sherry and Calvin. I grew up in the Bronx, and both of my parents were from the Dominican Republic. No one in my family had gone to college. My parents didn't speak English when they got here. So it seems like a pipe dream to be a lawyer, but I watched a lot of Law and Order and was very persistent. But I will say, some things I had to figure out by myself. I didn't really have that network growing up. But a lot of it was really, the work that people put in before me, and incredible mentors that I stumbled upon along the way, sought out. And that's why I'm very honored to be moderating this panel with this very impressive group of panelists. I think they are an invaluable resource for young attorneys. And that said, I don't want to take too much time from them, so I will kick us off. So the first question for our panelists is, could you describe some meaningful turning points in your career and how you made critical decisions throughout your career? And if Tamu, if you could kick us off.
Sure. So as as I kind of think about this question, what stands out to me is really how the turning points in my career, at least the major ones, are so closely connected to my personal life, and I think that's probably true for many of us. But really the main turning point is coming here as a foreign lawyer, and wanting to practice in Connecticut versus New York, because you sort of come here as a foreign lawyer and you could do the New York bar and practice in New York, but it was, at least at that time, a little more difficult to do that in Connecticut. And I was faced with the choice of sort of, going to law school for that second time, or, sort of biding my time and doing something in the interim and then perhaps returning to the Caribbean. And, at that moment, I think it probably framed how I approach critical decisions. From then on, I was kind of your typical law student and lawyer prior to that, with, kind of my eye always on the prize and a very strict timeline in my head. And I think what became clear to me was that that timeline really could no longer guide what I wanted in my professional life. you know, here I was in, you know, in Connecticut, and now I was going to do 3 more years of law school. So clearly the timeline wasn't working. But what guided me more so was, you know, what did I want? Where did I want to be in the next 3 to 4 years? Not necessarily next year. And you know, and I took the emphasis off of, wow, this really seems, you know, daunting at this moment, and rather, you know, in 4 years I can be where I want, and I'm not willing to really forego those, you know, professional aspirations that I had. So with that in my mind, and trying to figure out how to pay for law school the second time, fun. I forged ahead, and so, you know, that's kind of guided me throughout. Just that I'm in this for the long game, and what do I really want out of this long career that I'm going to have. And then, you know, 3 years later, you know, after I'd been through law school and found kind of, you know, exactly where I wanted to land at Paul Hastings, which was, you know, a smaller sized national law firm, and they had a spot in Stamford. You know, 3 years later, then they moved that office to New York City. And again, I was kind of faced with, you know, do I, you know, go with the ship and try to reinvent myself in New York City, or do I stick with what my gut tells me, which is that I'm suited to be right here in Stamford, Connecticut, at a firm that really suits me, even though, again, that was going to push out my timeline because I had to switch practice areas from real estate at Paul Hastings to debt finance here at Findixson. So again, I think it's just sort of a matter of what your guiding principle is, and that's going to be different for different people. But for me, it was really important that I realized kind of early on in my career that, you know, there's no race to the finish line. It's just, you know, what's really important is all the experience you gain along the way, and that you don't sort of throw in the towel on goals that are really important to you.
That's amazing, Tamu. Sherry, did you want to speak to this question as well?
No, yes, definitely. So I mentioned that I went from Murtha Cullina private sector law firm to the city of New Haven, and transitioning from the private to public sector was probably the most meaningful turning point in my career. I had not really pictured myself in the public sector. I think I always just thought that I have a business background, so I didn't mention that I actually earned an MBA before I went to law school. And so I always sort of imagined practicing law in the corporate sector. So when the opportunity at the city arose, I actually did not initially intend to apply for it. And then I had a really great friend who literally forced me to stay on the phone with her for an hour to explain to me why this was a great opportunity that I really needed to consider and that I really needed to try, and that it would give me management in the legal profession experience, and that was going to be good, and how I could transfer that back to the private sector if I wanted to at that time. And so it was a really long, engaging conversation convincing me to apply for one of the best decisions that I ever made. So what I really gained from that experience, and what I encourage others to always think about, is, you know, keep an open mind about where your career can take you. I'm going to apologize in advance because you might hear my son who just walked in the door. But I encourage all of you to definitely just keep an open mind. You know, you never know what practicing law is like. A lot, especially as a law student. I mean, you learn a lot about the law as a law student and the history of the law and what some people do with it, but you don't know what practicing law is like until you're practicing law, you know, and you can like a subject matter. That doesn't mean you're going to like practicing in that subject matter. And you also don't know what practicing is like in different forms. You know, practicing in the public sector is not the exact same as practicing in the private sector. And then there's different types of practice within each of those, right? We have people who are litigators, you have people who are transactional, you have people who are regulatory, you have environmental. I mean, there's such a wide range to be involved in this profession. And before you decide or assume that there's a path that you don't want to go down or foreclose an opportunity, be mindful about, you know, not only talking to mentors and friends and people who have been involved in those areas, but take opportunities to actually experience it yourself, because you really just never know what might be something that you have an interest in that you wouldn't have thought that you would. That experience at the city really made me realize that I likely wanted to stay in the public sector long term. I didn't really have an interest in going back to the private sector after working at the city, and I've been able to continue to transcend in the public sector as it is. And so it is clearly the most meaningful turning point in my entire career. And I do have, my friend is Ndidi Moses, for those of you who know her. She was the one that really encouraged me to apply for that job. So shout out to her, and I'm still very thankful for that conversation.
Thank you, Sherry. And before I go to our next question, I just want to let the attendees know that we are monitoring the chat room. So if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please definitely feel free to add them to the
Jeannie,
chat.
can I jump in before you move
Oh,
on?
sure.
Yeah, so I have to say, in case anyone's keeping track, I too am from New York. And on top of that, born in Queens, lived in Stamford, school in DC, and then any takers for San Francisco? Let's throw a couple more. Okay. So yeah, lots in common. I think that if we had a bingo card, we'd all be hitting off New York. And it's funny, Sherry and I feel like we have like a completely opposite tracks. So I started out thinking I was going to go public interest, public service, spent very long in private, finally ended up in state. And you kind of the reverse. So that's so awesome to hear your experiences. And in my short time so far in public service, I'm seeing all the things that you're talking about as well. It's so meaningful to me to feel like what I do impacts our citizens. We work for the taxpayers of Connecticut. So I just wanted to mention one thing that Tamu said that really resonated with me. It's making decisions based on long term, not short term. And my husband and I have this running joke that every job I've taken when I've switched, kind of pivoted, has meant less money for me, literally. So I moved from New York City to come to Connecticut. Pay scale's different. I took a pay cut, but I did it for family. Then I moved from a law firm in-house, took a pay cut, but it worked out okay for me in the long run. Then I came from the private sector to the state. And if anyone knows what state salaries are like, big pay cut. But again, because I did it for what was important to me, and I know it's going to work out in the long run. So just wanted to mention that.
Thanks, Jenny. So our next question for our panelists, could you tell us about key mentors that you've had throughout your career and what it is about them that made them so helpful to you? Calvin, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. And then I really love this question because obviously this is the LCD, and if we want to talk about mentorship and the gold standard for it, an organization like this, it supports it. I mean, we're basically preaching to the choir on this. But when I think of, I guess when you think about strong mentors and mentors in the traditional sense, I think about, among other things, the more seasoned senior partner down in the corner office at your firm, or the bureau chief I might have worked for, or supervisor I might have worked for. The traditional sense of those mentors who taught me the skills and taught me things about, the practice book here in Connecticut or the federal rules, the federal court. But when I think about, I guess, the mentors that sort of, not to downplay what they've done at all, of course, but the ones that really resonated with me, the ones that, seem to have influenced me the most and continue to do so. Because, even though I've been doing this for a while now, I can still say they're definitely people that I, rely upon, that I look towards as mentors. The folks that I think about the most are oftentimes not necessarily the people who are that much seasoned, for that matter, for that much older, I should say. A lot of times they're just around my age, for that matter, in some cases even more junior to me. And that's because, I guess, when we started out, when I started as a practitioner in Connecticut, there weren't a whole lot of folks like me. And when I say that, I mean basically Asian Pacific American attorneys. I mean, obviously it's changed a lot now in this state, thankfully, as well as, in this country overall. But, there weren't a lot of litigators too, for that matter, who were APAs. So, again, not to downplay or the others, the non-APA attorneys who have influenced me or who've looked out for me, that's definitely not the case. I'm indebted to many of those, particularly those whom I've worked for and supervised me. But, the ones that have basically helped me, those other peers I'm talking about, the folks that I've met through organizations such as NAPABA and CAPABA, folks that, are similar in age to me in many ways, folks that I, that we have collectively learned to trust each other so much so, and to reach out to in a way that we can discuss our experiences that we're going through. It's sort of like, we joke around, we call ourselves sort of like our little, sort of board of directors, so to speak, an advisory group on which we rely, ensuring that we're always looking out for each other. I mean, these are folks that have really helped me discuss some really pivotal points in my career, including, whether I'm going down the right path, it's the current place I may be at, should I go into, look into another law firm to that effect, not here, of course, changing this law firm, I should say, if any of my partners or colleagues that listen to me on this thing. But, what stronger path should I do while I'm here? What should I do? They've helped me develop, I guess, sort of those things that are really important that you don't really think about too much. There's sort of, I guess they call them the soft skills. And I don't quite understand why they're really necessarily soft skills, because they're so important. I mean, it almost like you downplay it, so to speak. But those are the things they don't teach you in law school. They don't teach you that in a lot of law firms, I can assure you that, and definitely not a lot of corporations. Things that, how to help build your practice, how to build a book of business, how to communicate well in such a way to become a rainmaker in some respects. Just those little things that aren't, quite frankly, very little at all. And that's why, again, I'm going to keep drawing upon it again. That's why working in organizations such as the LCD, the PABA, CAPABA, CHBA, Crawford, SABAC, all these affinity organizations, just so important. They really provide you with these mentors who are experiencing professional issues that are unique to you, possibly, but not so, because we're all in that same sort of category, so to speak. And just as importantly, I want to emphasize, that, they also provide you with opportunities to pay it forward and mentor others. I mean, that's something that's just so important, and quite frankly, just equally as rewarding to do. I mean, I could tell you right now, I've probably learned, I'll call my mentees in the past my mentors too, in some respect, because I've learned from them as well, just as much as hopefully they've learned from me.
Thank you, Calvin. Pilar, did you want to speak to this question as well?
Sure. I'll start with some unsolicited advice, but advice nonetheless to the students on the panel, which is, as Calvin was saying, having a mentor in this profession is critical, and more than one mentor if you're lucky. And it's such a privilege to have that. And I would encourage everyone, when you're presented with an opportunity, to be mentored. When someone offers you to talk about, future career options, or spend a day with them at their job, or whatever it might be, to take advantage of it. Even if the person, it seems intimidating to actually reach out to that person, or you think, oh, it would be a bother, or maybe it was an empty offer. More than likely, it's not an empty offer, especially coming from a group like this. You can well know that it's genuine, but because that is how you can really seek out mentors that wouldn't naturally come into your sphere, so to speak. And I've always tried to do that, because that was advice that was given to me by a mentor. And sometimes it can feel a little bit uncomfortable to send that email to somebody who gives you their business card, and you think, I don't know if they really meant it. And then usually you're pleasantly surprised. And just to pick up on what Calvin said too about the soft skills, and I think Cherie mentioned this before, when you go to law school, you are bombarded with lots of really technical information, and it can be really thorny and really challenging. And then you become a lawyer and you realize that you never really use most of it. That's the worst kept secret probably about being a lawyer. And the first day when you actually have to go to court, or you have to prepare a pleading, you realize, I don't even know what the heading is supposed to look like on this document. And I don't even know what side of the courtroom I'm supposed to sit on. And what time does it start? And you're sort of presented with all of these really basic challenges that you realize you're not really prepared for. And, that's part of the job, and everybody gets through it. But that's really the benefit of having a great mentor, is to kind of get the ins and outs of the profession, learn the landscape. And particularly for those of you who are thinking about practicing in Connecticut, which is the only place I've ever practiced, and particularly in the jobs I've had, the bar is pretty small. People will say that to you when you become a lawyer, and it's true. And so it's really important to not only be able to navigate the challenges that come with that, but to have someone you trust and that you can confide in, that is going to give you good advice about how to do your job, not just the technical aspects of it, but sort of the more personal aspects of it, and kind of navigating some of those difficult issues. And I think one other point is, mentors sometimes come in all shapes and sizes. Calvin alluded to the fact that sometimes someone who you are a mentor to can become your mentor. I'm a mentor in my office, and I was sort of embarrassed to be assigned to be the mentor to my mentee, who had more experience than I did, working at a very prestigious law firm. And sure enough, a year later, I'm calling him as much as he calls me for advice, and it's been a really great, reciprocal relationship. So you can sometimes find mentors in unlikely places, and it doesn't have to be the most senior person at your firm or the most experienced trial attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office necessarily. But once you find them, hold on to them and take advantage of them. I know personally, a professor I had in law school who then became a colleague at the State's Attorney's Office is someone I go to with legal questions, with personal, concerns, and with happy news and sad news, still to this day. So I encourage everyone to take advantage of the opportunities, not only at LCD, but wherever else you meet people, because really, I think most lawyers in the state that I know, they want to help, and they really take a lot of personal pride in being a mentor. So I would encourage you all to take advantage of all those opportunities.
Thank you, Pilar. Cherie, did you want to speak as well?
Yes, and I'm going to try very hard to not duplicate, but to add a little bit to what both Calvin and Pilar said. First, I did see that Robin asked in the chat about affinity bars, and Calvin and Pilar have talked a bit about them, and I represent, I think, a third affinity bar, which I will say I was very active in Crawford as a younger attorney, and even at one point was on the advisory committee for them as I got a little, I guess, seasoned, as we'll say. But oddly enough, I was the secretary of the Crawford Black Bar Association. So I was on board of directors, but I also served as secretary. And I have to say that was, in my opinion, the best role to have, because there were so many people in this state that knew me because I sent out the correspondence for the Black Bar Association, right? So, so I would meet people and they would literally say things like, I get emails from you. I get emails from you. And I'm like, who's this person? So I have to say, and I'm embarrassed because one of my mentors is clearly also speaking in chat, but this is why one of the things I want to say when we're talking about both Calvin and what Pilar said is that please don't turn down a mentor in any forum. It's amazing to have a mentor from the Black Bar Association. There are things that I can discuss with those mentors that I can't necessarily talk to everyone about in my practice area, but they understand it and we can talk about it. They can tell me about their experiences and how they navigated it as a Black attorney, sometimes very specifically as a Black female attorney. And that conversation, you can't repeat that. Okay. I mean, it's just, you can't get that from anywhere else. It is amazing to be part of Lawyers Collaborative for Diversity, because then you also realize how some of your shared experiences as Black attorneys are shared by Hispanic attorneys, or shared by Asian attorneys, are shared by attorneys, because we can't forget that we have non-affinity attorneys that support the work of LCD on a regular basis and are very active, like my former boss and mentor, Bert Cohen, who's been on the board of directors for LCD. He was on for quite some time. And that breadth of experience from different groups of people is yet another layer of information that you're just really able to understand the entirety of practices and the entirety of lived experiences better when you have mentors in different walks of life and in different forms who can tell you how they've handled things. It was extremely rewarding, of course, to be able to get not just a mentor, but a sponsor. You will hear about the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, but also don't take for granted that sometimes your mentor becomes your sponsor. And to this day, when I even want, if I need a letter of recommendation, or I want someone who's going to say nice things for me, I will always call Bert Cohen, because Bert Cohen is not just a mentor, but he is a sponsor. And he not only helped me develop some of my very core legal skills that I continue to use for this day, but he has been solely responsible for really helping with my client development. He was one of the first partners at the firm to make sure that I was face-to-face with clients, that they knew who I was, they knew what work I was doing for them, and I was able to have that one-on-one interaction interaction with them. And then someone invited me to be part of N of Court when I was at the city of New Haven. And that's when I first started interacting with judges and litigators, which was not my practice area, right? So now I'm interacting with people in different practice areas and judges. And I will tell you, it was from a crossover of all of those relationships that I really had people encourage me to apply for the judiciary in the state, right? And so you really have to think about the fact that you not only get this information that helps you with your practice, but you form relationships with people who not only mentor, but also sponsor, and who you can continue to learn from and who will start to learn from you as well. I've had that same experience where sometimes my mentor will call me and say, Cherie, how do you think I should do this? Because, X, Y, and Z is happening. I want to make sure, and it becomes more of a relationship. You stop even viewing it so much as mentor-mentee, and it just becomes a very trusting relationship with people that have your best interest at heart and people whose best interest you have at heart. So please don't turn down an opportunity, whether it's affinity-wise, whether it's in your practice area, whether it's just learning something new in your community. Involve yourself in as many things as you can outside of your job, and create those relationships with as many people as you can across all walks of life, because all of those relationships become meaningful and powerful for your career and your future.
Thank you, Sherry. I think that's great advice. And I'm actually gonna, we have a great question from our chat. And if anyone can answer. When you started your career, how did you find ways to combat imposter syndrome or grow your confidence from the bar through practice? It's a great question.
I can pipe in here. Angelica, I think you and I met at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I remember having a conversation with you, so hopefully it won't be repetitive. But I can certainly relate to this. I've always been the youngest person at my job wherever I've been. All of us were the youngest person at our job at one point, I guess, but that seems to have been my a recurrent theme. And so I can totally understand what you're saying. And sometimes you end up at a place and you think, surely I don't belong here. I don't have the same credentials. I don't look like everyone else. I haven't done all the things that people have done. And when I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, I certainly felt that. I didn't go to an Ivy League law school. I hadn't worked at a firm in New York. I hadn't clerked for a federal judge. And that was really the background that many of my colleagues have. It's incredibly impressive. I am in awe of all of them. And it's not to say that there's to take anything away from them, but I certainly felt, my path there was really different than most other people that work in the office. And one of the things that I have tried to do throughout my career to combat what you're talking about is to seek feedback from people that you work with. And whether it's from other lawyers or judges, like, hey, how did you think I did? Do you think there's something I can do better? The reality is, if you're the type of person who does that, most likely you're doing a good job, because you're wanting to improve yourself and you're conscious about, developing your skills in whatever practice you're doing. And, again, you have to just constantly remind yourself whenever you get a job, especially if it's a job you really want, that you deserve to be there as much as anybody else, that even if you don't fit the mold, air quotes, it doesn't mean that you're not qualified. And in fact, in my opinion, I think it makes you a really valuable asset. Everybody brings something different. It's not a cliche, it's true. And people's different backgrounds, whether it be where they went to law school, where they grew up, their prior experience before joining a firm or, a public sector job, it all creates a well-rounded person. And whatever you have in your life, whether it's your life experience or your work experience, that makes you a valuable member of whatever team you're a part of. And you have to remember that not everybody has the same skill set. Some people are great writers and can write a brief, so I work with people, they sit down and write a brief, it blows my mind, something that would take me 2 weeks. And some people are great advocates in court, and some people are really good at relating to clients or victims or their colleagues. And so you have to remind yourself that just because you don't fit the mold that you think you should fit in or that you see around you, it doesn't mean that you're not a valuable member of the team. And it's hard not to feel that way sometimes, especially as a new lawyer, and especially when you get something that you think you shouldn't. You think that this was a stretch. I can't believe I got this job. I experienced that. And I certainly felt inadequate when I first got there. I'd been a lowly state prosecutor, kind of grinding my days away, doing motor vehicle matters. And then I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office suddenly. But I think that it just goes to show that, you should have confidence in your own abilities. And you should always just remember that what makes you unique is what makes your group great. And, remind yourself of that when you have any self-doubt.
So I'm going to jump in here too. I actually like to tell the story of the first day that I drove up to the state capitol to park, because that was where I was working. I remember saying, do I work at the state capitol? Like, is this really happening right now? It really I was still trying to wrap my head around it. But there are certainly, in full disclosure, things that I'm still trying to develop about trusting myself and understanding how much value I add to a situation. But some things that have become very clear to me. One, just because somebody has more confidence than you doesn't mean that they have more skill than you. And I had to experience those interactions to start to understand that. I think that sometimes it's intimidating to be around people who come across as if they know more. That doesn't mean they do. And that's not taking away from their knowledge. It's just trying to remind you that it doesn't mean you don't know as much or don't have the same skill level just because somebody else has come to the table with more confidence. So you've really got to trust yourself and keep in mind that there's a reason that you're at that table too. Right? You didn't get there by accident. You're not there by happenstance. There is a reason that you are sitting at the same table as the people whose backgrounds or demeanors may come across as making you feel like maybe you shouldn't be there. The point is you are, and there's definitely a reason for that. And I had to start to come to terms with the value that I was bringing and what I was adding to conversations. And it did help when I started to get more validation and feedback from others who would explain that to me. It did also help when I started to have people recommending me for positions and opportunities and saying, I really think you should try that out, because that showed that they appreciated my work. And that will come with your time and experience and your skill. But you've got to trust that you're in the room for a reason, and don't back away or be shy from offering to that room the very reason why you're there.
Thank you, Sherry. And thank you, Angelica, for the question. I mean, that's something that I think a lot of diverse attorneys, at least from my experience, struggle with. And with that, I will take us to our next question. It's actually a two-part question. First, what do you know now that you wish you'd known earlier in your career? And secondly, what do you now realize you shouldn't have worried about earlier in your career? And Ginny, do you want to take this one first?
Yes, refer to what Pilar and Sherry just said. That was pretty much it. Absolutely. The thing that I wish I knew then was that I didn't have to be so afraid and feel like I didn't belong, because what I learned is that almost everybody was feeling the same thing. Even people that I believed were full of confidence. People were just better at faking it than I was. And I remember one day my son was playing in a soccer match, and he was one of the on the offensive side, and he was having a hard time in that pivotal moment when you're right before the goal and you have to just gotta go for the strike. It's a hard moment when I used to play field hockey. When you're right there, you have to have that final drive, and it's confidence to know that you can do it. And the goalie's always making you feel intimidated. And one day I noticed that the goalie had this look of fear in his eyes. And so I told my son, I was like, you know what, Adam, that goalie's more scared of you than you are of trying to make a goal. And he went back out the next game, and he started just making goals. He quit soccer eventually. He became a swimmer, but it was that little mental switch where you realize that you're not the only one who's feeling that way. And to Sherry's point, you earned your spot there for a reason. And if you just stop taking up brain space, worrying about how you don't belong, you can become everything that you are in the room. You just have to stop being distracted by all of that. And, I love Pilar's point about everybody brings something different skill sets. And so, while you may think that you don't have like all the different things that, XYZ person has, you probably have some other skills that that person doesn't have. For me, I think it was a sense of humor. That was all I had to bring to the table. But sometimes that's what you needed.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yep.
Pilar, did you want to speak to this question?
I'll just briefly add on what Ginny said and kind of piggybacking on what I said before. I think it's important to remember, especially as you're going through law school, that there's no one right path to whatever your goal is. And in law school, you will be told there is a right path, or other young lawyers will tell you, you have to do this if you ever want to be this. You have to do a clerkship with a federal judge if you ever want to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, for example. You have to be the editor of your law journal if you ever want to, get that first job at a firm. And it's really not true. All of those things are great goals. And if you're interested in doing a clerkship, you should by all means pursue to the best of your ability doing a clerkship. If you love writing and research and you want to be on a journal, do that. But I think it's important to remember that life is short. You want to be a lawyer because you want to enjoy your job and you want to enjoy your life. And so you have to do the things that interest you. And I think it's important to keep a focus on that and not worry so much about what you think you should be doing because other people are doing it, or because there's some set, kind of syllabus for a successful lawyer. Because as you can see from this panel, we've all had really different experiences. We all went to law school in different places, worked in private sector, public sector, and various different practice areas. And I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think we all love being lawyers, and we're really happy with where we've ended up. And that's the most important thing, because you don't want to put in all this work and frankly pay all this money and take all this time out of your life to become a lawyer, only to do things that you don't like doing because you think you're supposed to be doing it. And there are so many wonderful things you can do as a lawyer. It really is. The opportunities are endless in many ways. Short of maybe like Ginny's family can't do surgery on anyone or anything like that. I don't think anyone would want us going near medical equipment. But my advice to you on that.
Not unless you want me painting in front of you.
Something that I wish I had known was, don't worry so much about what you think you're supposed to do, and do what you're interested in doing. And maybe it turns out you're not interested in doing it once you start. But maybe you get lucky like me and you get your first job as a prosecutor and you think this is the greatest job that anybody could ever have as a lawyer. And I hope I fully expect that's how I feel about my what I hope to be doing soon. So I hope for you all to pursue what you really enjoy doing and not worry so much about what you think you should be doing.
Thank you, Pilar. Camus, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, sure. And I'm not sure it necessarily fits neatly into this question, but one thing that I sort of didn't immediately appreciate at the beginning of my career in the U.S. is just sort of the impact on diverse attorneys that comes with working in traditionally non-diverse environments. That was something that I didn't come from. I wasn't used to it. Obviously, I'm from a country where I'm not in the minority, and the legal profession more or less looks like me. And it took me quite a few years to really appreciate that, in an environment like that, you're able to sort of go about your day-to-day, without thinking about issues of diversity and inclusion. Not entirely, because believe me, every country in the world has their own issues on this front. But, in a lot of respects, it doesn't weigh on your mind in the same way that it weighs here. And I think the result of that is that it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy out of diverse attorneys to sort of constantly, if not thinking about it actively, to just be noting it all the time, that you're, the only Black attorney in the room, or the only Asian attorney in the room, or the only, whatever in the room, or the only voice on a call, or the only, foreigner with a different accent, or I think that really takes a lot of energy, and I think that it's important for diverse lawyers and young lawyers to to note that early on and to recognize that it takes energy, and to feel comfortable sort of addressing that how you see fit, you know, whether it's taking a more active role in D&I issues at your firm or your organization or not. So I think it's a very personal sort of choice, and something I think that's important kind of early on in your career to acknowledge and to recognize.
Thank you, Tamu. And I have a question from our chat. What can white middle-aged Connecticut lawyers be doing to create work environments where diverse lawyers both want to join and have equitable opportunities to thrive? And also just how to keep, you know, good talent in Connecticut rather than, you know, people leaving for New York.
I will say I was laughing when I saw that, since so many of us came from New York voluntarily.
Yeah. Whatever you're doing, you're doing a good job right now.
All right, some of us, you know, saw the opportunity. No. But I genuinely appreciate the question, because I think the reality is that one thing that diverse attorneys experience more frequently, and I think women experience more frequently, are just assumptions, you know, made about them in a room. And while I do think that every single individual is guilty of assumptions, when you're the outlier or the person that stands out, there are more people in the room with assumptions about you than per se are happening about anybody else in the room, right? So it feels a little unbalanced and you feel a little out of whack. And, you know, it's funny because I am actually a huge fan of organizational diversity training. I just think that one of the problems is that sometimes it's not done the right way, which doesn't always help. But I think there are ways to have and engage employees in diversity training where you give people a better understanding about their own biases, so that it's less of a blame game and more of just an understanding that we're all human, and that we all come to the table from our own lived experiences and the exposure that we had. And for some of us, that's more diverse, and for some of us, it's not. You know, I remember that when I was in law school, I had a student say to me that I was the first Black person he ever met. Now, he later told me that that wasn't true, and he doesn't know why he said that. I'm not really sure which one is true or not. I'm not sure it matters. But the reality is that not everybody comes from a diverse experience in their life, right? And some people that have biases, they're not doing that intentionally. That just comes from their lack of exposure. And I think that when we can really educate each other more about that, and not blame people, but just create the open educational space and make people aware that we all have the biases and should work on that and how to communicate, I think that's also helpful. But I also think what's helpful is being an active person in reaching out the hand for experiences with someone who's not like you, right? So one of the things that I think a lot of people experience in a law firm, and why people of color and women have often had a little bit more of a difficult time moving up in the ranks, is because a lot of times there used to be, and to some degree might still be, a good old boys network where somebody taps their mentee and says, come on, we'll go golfing together and we'll go and do this together, and I'm going to train you and I want to watch you come up. And often that person getting tapped is a young white male. You know, it's not a female and it's not a person of color. And so I think that when you're speaking about what a middle-aged white man can do, tap someone who doesn't look like you know, to go golfing with you or to go to another experience with you. I really did not intend to give him 2 shout outs, but part of the reason why Bert and I became so close is because Bert absolutely brought me everywhere, to all of his client engagement events. You know, I never once felt like I wasn't a part of his legal advice experience. I wasn't a part of his experience at the firm. I felt very comfortable with him from the very beginning because he really extended that hand and made me a complete part of his process of being a partner to me as his associate and being a senior partner in the firm. And that was a significant, you know, experience for me to understand that I would be welcomed and accepted and have friends that may not look like me, but that respected me for my legal career and what I could bring to the table. So extend that hand, you know, in addition to trying to make people aware, extend that hand to people that you may not have normally extended that hand to make sure that they're receiving the same types of experiences and exposure as people who have traditionally received it.
If I could chime in that a little bit as well. I mean, I got to tell you, I mean, the idea of, you know, losing people to, I guess, like New York City, or for that matter, Boston, everything like that. I mean, I totally understand that. Connecticut, one of the things that is great about our state overall is I think it's been mentioned a few times. It's it's a small state for the most part. Bar here is very close knit. We all know each other. Well, you know of each other, I guess you'd say, here and there, and you definitely will get to know each other a lot easier than any other place. And for such a small state, and I'm going to get on my soapbox again about affinity bar associations and LCD and everything. We have these organizations here, these wonderful, powerful, well-organized organizations here. That young attorneys and attorneys of color, or people who care about attorneys of color or female attorneys or anything, or diverse attorneys, can be involved in and support. So I guess, in addition to, obviously all the great points that Sherry made, making sure that, you have them come with you to different events and be part of different events and be tapped to go to different things, also be supportive of them being able to participate and be very active in these organizations. I mean, one of the big things that's, that takes a lot of work is, a lot of folks here know this, be on the board of any of these affinity bar associations or the LCD. It takes a lot of work, but guess what? They're going to be surrounded by a whole bunch of folks that, as I mentioned earlier, can become their mentors, or they can mentor as well. And that's a sort of an experience that that I don't think you can get in many places. And that's what's very rare about this state. So, and it's hard to, when I say that, it's not easy to do. I get that, because they have a lot of work to do. They're going to be, oh my God, you're tell me, Calvin, I have to make my associate do that. What if they have all these assignments, they have billable hour requirements, something like that? Make sure they have the time in which to do that, because otherwise, they're going to lose out or potentially not see what's so special about the state and all these different organizations that we have here that make us so special.
Calvin, that is such a great point about providing the space for diverse attorneys when they want to make the time. And then just the flip side of that is, don't have only the diverse attorneys do all the diversity activities, because that becomes the tax on their time. And it's, they're the check the box token. You really want to encourage other members of your firm to participate broadly, because that's also going to benefit a person. I love the fact that Evan, the person who asked the question, is on LCD. He is I'm not, Evan, these are your words, a white middle-aged man. That's never how I would have described you. I would have just described you as awesome, Evan. And it's wonderful that Evan is part of our community, and, I'm getting to know Evan through LCD. Hopefully he's getting to know all of us. And honestly, sometimes I feel like just the friendships that you develop, you get to know people on a personal level. And that's when you start seeing beyond the skin or the gender, and you really get to see people for who they are. And the more diversity you have in your circles, and the more, if you've met only me, Jenny Kim, as your only Asian American friend, you're going to think that they're all wacko like I am, but there's actually a lot more, really cool people. So you want to meet a lot of different people so that you can get a more diverse understanding of what an Asian American is.
Thank you, everyone. So our next question, could you speak to your biggest professional challenges and how you navigated them? Calvin or Jenny?
I guess I'll start off, and first I'll just say on the record, and I know we're being recorded, so it's on the record. Ginny is very super cool, and I can assure you, who doesn't know her, should get to know her and realize that. So I know we're recording this, and so if she ever wants to say I never said anything nice or whatever, I could always point to this, because it's very true. Okay, professional challenges. I mean, obviously, you're going to come across so many professional challenges in your practice, being a lawyer, whichever area you may be. Private, or being in the government or anything like that. But I'd say, if I want to highlight a professional challenge in particular, I'd like to highlight something that kind of happened early on in my, before I even started my career. When I was, as early as when I decided, or I was trying to decide what I wanted to do for a living, I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I know it's a little strange. Some folks are like, really? You don't want to be a fireman? You don't want to be a police officer or an athlete, sports guy? No, I always wanted to be a lawyer. And interestingly, I also wanted to be a litigator too, of all things. I don't know what it is that led me to want to do that. It's definitely not something you hear a lot of, particularly when I was, back when I was looking into that type of career choice. It's not things that most APAs, see themselves doing. I mean, growing up, my father was an electrical engineer, and he did everything in his power to try to make me an electrical engineer. And of course, he failed miserably, as you can all see. And but, I don't know what it is, but the bottom line, it was my calling. And I remember when I went to college, there was a person down the hall from me in my dormitory, and he was also an APA. And I remember having a conversation about what we want to do for a living. What do you want to be when you grow up type of thing, conversation. And he wanted to be a doctor. He was very science oriented. He was pre-med, all that stuff, and from my understanding, actually, I think he actually is a very successful doctor now. I told him I wanted to be a lawyer. And I told him I not only want to be a lawyer, but I want to be a litigator. I want to be a trial lawyer. And I want to be a prosecutor too, because I watched a lot of Law and Order episodes, and I want to be Sam Waterston, whatever the heck, And he said something to me that still, that resonates to me to this day still, which is, and I remarkably, I guess naively, never really thought about it, when I was thinking about my career path. He basically said, are you sure you want to do that? There's a lot of racism out there. How are you going to get juries to listen to you, or judges, or witnesses, or be able to, question or cross-examine witnesses, or intimidate them to the extent that you have to intimidate them in cross-examination. Now, of course, this is like decades ago, and there were much fewer AP lawyers, particularly in the state, and probably even fewer known litigators in the state. And I guess, I mean, the idea of, I'm not just saying about APAs, but I know obviously anyone, females, I think Shuri talked about this, and others have talked about this, females as well as, other people, attorneys of color, they're all different biases, whether explicit or implicit, that people have about, what we can do. But as an APA professional, I know, you always hear that concept, keep your head down and just be hard workers and not necessarily speak up and make a whole lot of noise. And of course, that's precisely what litigators are supposed to do. We're supposed to speak up and in some extent make some noise, although in a crafty way, I guess you'd say. So, from that challenge, I doubled down on it. I mean, I really basically said, you know what, I'm totally going to do this. I remember, I basically saying, hey, I'm going to definitely be a prosecutor. Now, I applied to the DA's offices all in New York City. I didn't look into private practice in the beginning at all. I took opportunities, to do trials and hearings, right away. I was that guy, like, oh, is there a trial coming up? All right, I'll take that trial, I did everything I could to sort of hone my craft and learn how to speak well and speak on my feet. And, I have to say, many times, at least early in my career, I think it's possible that my adversaries might have underestimated me because of, maybe because of who I was, or, the fact that I was, an APA attorney and a young one at it, So I'd like to think that, I overcome that. Maybe folks, unfortunately now folks probably aren't underestimating me anymore. So maybe that's a bad thing necessarily, but that's, I guess that was the challenge I went through.
Thank you, Calvin.
Oh, yes, sorry. It's funny because my mom said the same thing to me when I told her I didn't want to be a doctor and I wanted to be a lawyer. And she said, you're an Asian American woman. You're supposed to be a doctor because then they can't take away the skills that you have. Everything else is dependent on relationships and you're just not going to make it. And interestingly, I was pigheaded like Calvin apparently is and move forward. But two challenges really just have, I think I recall specifically running into. One was as a woman, I was leading a large multi-company project at one point, and I was, in the leadership role and running these meetings. And it was actually mostly by telephone call because we were all geographically dispersed. And there was this one person who was just your classic kind of bullyish personality who was always kind of interjecting and interrupting the calls, and I felt was undermining my authority as the leader. And I'm sure some other women have had similar experiences. But fortunately, I was a little bit older at the time and a little bit more confident and knew how to deal with it. I didn't know how to deal with it earlier in my years. So what I did was I reached out to him afterwards and we had a conversation. And very calmly, I just told him the facts, that I felt that he interjected a few times too many and that I didn't appreciate it, that I really respect his points because, he was very sincere. It was not malicious. So I wasn't accusing him. I was just telling him what was happening and how I felt about it, not trying to attribute intent to him. And to his credit, he was appalled at himself and apologized. And and was so wonderful and so supportive of me on the phone calls afterwards. He kept saying like, Ginny, what do you think? And just, it was a wonderful conversation. And he retired before I did, and he sent me a really nice email, and it turned it into a wonderful experience. So I would say, sometimes when you're faced with adversity, give the person the benefit of the doubt and have a nice private conversation with them. You can always, almost always, I'll say that, resolve something when you give people the benefit of the doubt, and just address the behaviors and not attribute intent. And that's a classic relationship advice too. I think my husband and I have been taught that as well. And the other thing was difficult managers. We've all had difficult managers. I think I've been blessed with more great, amazing managers than bad, but when you work for 26 years, you're going to run into a couple of difficult personalities. And there I'm reminded by something that Mark Twain says about New England weather. If you don't like it, just wait a minute. So the lesson I learned sometimes was just be patient, because sometimes the situation will just change. Either you will move on to a different job, or the manager will go away somewhere. And so it resolves itself. But in the meantime, while you're still in that situation, don't do anything that, don't send angry emails, all of those classic anger management things, obviously you want to do. Build your exit strategy smartly. Don't make a rash decision, like we talked about before. And when you need to, if you think the difficult manager is undermining your authority or doing anything that you feel is a behavior that you need to call them out on it, please give yourself that support and advocate for yourself without emotion, without attribution of intent, very respectfully. And 9 times out of 10, I would say that will work to your advantage. But the worst thing you can do is let it fester and not say anything, because you're just going to grow resentful. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Jenny. And so we only have a few minutes left, but if anyone from the audience has any questions, feel free to add them to the chat, or if any of our panelists had anything else they wanted to add.
So it sounds like this might be a wrap. So this gives me a chance to just thank Tahiti for doing such an excellent job in running the panel. Thank you, Tahiti. And thank you to our panelists. You all were wonderful. Very much appreciate you sharing so much of your professional and personal journeys. I think it's invaluable for people, particularly young lawyers of color, to hear this and to understand the challenges you face, the success that you've had, the mentors that have been part of your life, and how you kind of look back on things and realize what you shouldn't have worried about. I like that question a lot. So thank you all so much. Thank you very much to the attendees for participating, and we'll look forward to seeing you at further LCD events. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.